Good morning, my fellow Canadians. Communism Redux. Okay, communism. I'm a child of the Cold War. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. I have an ethnic connection to the realities of communism. I'll get into that. And a military connection. Communism. The appeal of communism still lives. I was watching those protesters marching along University Avenue waving communist flags at the Pegida rallies I've attended, and I'm pro Pegida, by the way, seeing Antifa types and the communist or socialist banners being flown. First military dictum: know your enemy. This is not a digression, I'll get to there. I love talking to people who embrace communism. I love talking to people who are anti-firearm. I love talking to people who support the Liberals or who are anti-conservative or who support the NDP. I like to talk to them where you can have a reasoned discussion. I like talking to them. And it's something to bear in mind. When you talk to somebody who is in opposition to you and you listen to what they have to say, you gather a tremendous amount of information. Hence, know your enemy. You get to understand how they think, what arguments they bring forward, what evidence they ignore to put forward their arguments. And it allows you to formulate counter arguments if in the future you have a discussion on this topic. You have counter arguments already formulated. You've done your research, you have counter numbers, whatever. Okay? So I love talking to people who embrace or think that communism is a good idea. But I sit there and I'm just like, whoa. Now, when I say this statement, it's meant rhetorical. It's not meant as a challenge. How stupid can you be to tout a system that is probably the most murderous system that has ever been put forward? Russia, over 80 million dead in the Soviet Union, 80 million since the 19 October Revolution, and that's probably even a low number. How many people did Mao kill? Quarter of the population of Cambodia killed. Venezuela today, they're shooting their own citizens. And yet people say, the counter argument I heard, and I love this one, well, it's never been done right. You're right. The reason it's never been done as it was written is because it can't be done the way it is written. Now, I read the Communist Manifesto. I read Das Kapital by Karl Marx. My grandparents came from Eastern Europe. My grandmother's village, where she was born, it was a small village. It no longer exists under Stalin and the starvation of the Ukrainian peasantry. Her village was too small to bother to re-inhabit, so they just razed it, and it's all farmland. Only a very few older people even remember that a village existed there. So, thank you, Joseph Stalin. How many Canadians know about what the Ukrainians call the Holodomor, the starvation of the Ukrainians? And that was done to bring them into line. But it wasn't just the Ukrainians who suffered. The Poles, Slovenians, Slovakians, Czechs, all the Baltic states, Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, all suffered under the Soviet Union and the enforced Russification programs. Now, back to communism. When you read the theory of communism, it is a utopian society. It really is. What is proposed is a utopian society. Once again, we encounter the same problem: theory versus reality. In theory, it is a marvelous utopian society. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. It's predicated on this concept of a benevolent dictatorship watching over all the parts and everybody laboring for the good of everybody else. Really? So that negates human nature entirely. It negates the fact that where there is power to be had, there will be people who will seek power. Where there's dominance to be had, there will be people who will seek to be dominant over their fellow man. Where there is money to be made, there will be people who will try to make more money. where there is, it stifles creativity, it stifles entrepreneurship. Uh, where is the incentive to be better? There's no promotion in it. This is your lot in life. This is your slot. That's where you are allocated. I grew up, like I said, in the Cold War. And the true nature of Stalinist style Sovietism or communism was revealed to the world when Igor Gouzenko woke up Canada when he defected in Ottawa and brought all that documentation with him. We saw how heavily we've been infiltrated and subverted by the Soviet Union. And a lot of that information, of course, went to the US. It really broke things open. Gouzenko, of course, had to live in hiding, him and his family, under a false name because the Soviets always tried to find out where he was to kill him. People are unaware of that. So, what gives with this resurgence in the love affair with communism? Outside of that absolutely inane argument that it's never been done right, in spite of the historical evidence, like I said, in spite of what's going on in Venezuela now, every communist regime has proven it's Cuba, China, every communist regime has proven itself to be an oppressive, repressive regime. Every one of them. Not one of them has been successful. Not one. Not once it has ever been tried. So this love affair is coming back out, and I'm like, what the hell's wrong with people? Where is this coming from? Again, I go back to something I've mentioned in the past, the academics. Because in theory, it is a utopian society, and there are people who embrace this utopian society as a theory, and that we could make it work. Well, you can't, but we can make it work. And they're inculcating these young kids with this is the wave of the future, and this is the way things should be, and this is a viable alternative to democracy or republicanism or monarchies or whatever. So these kids swallow this stuff without doing any research and jump on the bandwagon, the Young Communist League and Socialist League. Now, they fall into two camps that I've seen, the academics and their toadies, the ones who have been inculcated with this. The days of, it appears, independent research where someone sits there, takes a contrary view, supportable one, and says, no, this is wrong, this doesn't work, because they get downshouted, marginalized, ostracized, belittled, or if you're in an academic environment, you stand to lose your academic credentials, or if you're a student, you stand a chance to fail and get a failing grade from your prof for not following the party line. These academics who push this, again, we're back to theory versus reality. The academics who push this or who embrace this, they don't live that lifestyle. They've never been. I was behind the Iron Curtain in 1974, and I saw Ukraine, Romania, Hungary. Hungary wasn't bad. Ukraine, oh, what a depressing, bloody sight that was. And the propaganda, of course, from the in-tourist guides, you have to swallow that up with a happy face. It's mandatory, by the way. The propaganda lectures were a mandatory part of the tour. The paranoia, the suspicion, the drab. I won't go, I could write a book about my experiences behind the Iron Curtain. Then in the military, at that time, the Canadian military had combined the Canadian Provo Corps, which was the military police, with the Canadian Intelligence Corps, and it was called the Security Services. So they wore the same cap badge. There was no way to distinguish who was what from the uniform. Uh, they found out very quickly that this was not a good idea because you get some intelligence analyst would get the shit kicked out of him because someone had a bitch on for the military police. And some people, you look at them, obviously they can't be a military policeman. So they finally, now again, they've gone back to a separate intelligence corps badge. But as a result of the security services, it was given as an option, which was a good option, to do the basic intelligence operator course. Okay, at Canadian Forces School of Intelligence and Security up in CFP Borden. And I did the course, the basic one, to give you an idea of what intelligence goes through. And if you want to transfer, I didn't, but to at least understand the function and the role and the work of the Intelligence Corps. That was an eye-opener, even with what I already knew about communism from my ethnic connection. That was still an eye-opener for me. Some of the information, non-restricted, but that it was available, let's say, maybe not to the general public, but research, you could have found out this information. We don't know, a lot of Canadians are totally unaware of exactly how hot that Cold War was and of the jockeying for position and the nasty little things that were being played. I mean, there's spy movies, things like this, Spy versus Spy, um, um, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which give an idea. That was actually a pretty good spy movie if you've never seen it, with Richard Burton. It's worth the watch. So I watch these academics embracing this system. None of this theory impacts them. They don't live that socialist lifestyle. They have all their perks, all their luxuries. They have all the goodies. It's a theoretical construct to them, but there's no contact with reality for these idiots. So they can postulate and opine and theorize and embrace this as a wonderful system and the true future of mankind until they see the reality, but they've never been. For anybody who is even considering embracing communism, there's a very good book, probably long out of print, but you can find it if you look around. It's called The God That Failed, and it deals specifically, these were people who had embraced intelligentsia and literati, who had embraced the socialist lifestyle and got their eyes opened either by seeing communism at work, seeing the true reality of life under the Soviet system, or some manner of personal epiphany caught them, and they were, like I said, their eyes were opened and the true nature of what they were embracing was revealed to them. And they had, I give them full credit for this, they had the maturity and the wisdom to say, you know what, I embraced this, it sounded good, I made a mistake. And I am reversing my viewpoint and I'm being vocal about it because I was wrong. Isn't that a mature thing to say? I was wrong. I embraced the concept, I touted a theory, I pushed forward something, and I found out later I was wrong. I had the maturity and the grace to stand up in front of the public and say, you know what, I was wrong. I made a mistake. And to them, 100% kudos to them for having done that. No, most of them are dead now. Malcolm Muggeridge springs to mind immediately, the British socialist. So I'm watching these kids watching down, waving the banners. Now, these are just a bunch of brainwashed morons. And God love them. You know, they mean well. The idealism, I understand all that, but these are a bunch of brainwashed idiots who have embraced this without doing their own due diligence. And I've seen this before among the left. The left tends to congregate with other members of the left, and their conversations, everything reinforces each other. They don't allow a dissenting opinion. They don't allow a contrary viewpoint into these nice little enclaves. It's all them basically stroking each other's dicks and telling each other, yes, you're right. And so it's positive reinforcement from peers, but there is no alternative viewpoint ever allowed to be presented. And I've seen this before many times. Then the other crew, and the ones that sort of amazed me, are the ones who grew up, expats from the Soviet system, who grew up in the communist system, and they want it back. Now you'd look at this, like from my standpoint, and I was wondering, how in the name of God can you wish you return to that system? And then you find out these are people who are uncomfortable with democracy, with the responsibilities of democracy. They loved the fact that they were told where they would go to school. They were told what jobs they would take, how much they would make. They were housed by the state, educated by the state, fed by the state. Personal responsibility, independence is totally alien to them, and they're uncomfortable with it. I have to find a job. I mean, I have to go out and find a job and put myself forward, fight with others for this job. I have to hunt up an apartment. It's not assigned me by the state. I don't have a basic minimum income. And these are people who agitate for a return to that because they're not comfortable with personal independence. So those are the two crews I see: the brainwashed idiots and the ones who long for return. It's an interesting thing in the human condition, how people will remember a series of events. Uh, they tend to remember the good times. If people talk about a tour and they forget about the time that this bad thing happened or that bad thing happened, and they remember the good times. I've seen that in the military, getting together sometimes with old friends on rare occasions where I've met people and you talk about the funny incidents that happened, the amusing anecdotes, talking about so and so and how they worked out. You remember when so and so did this? Yeah, right. And we tend as people to gloss over the negatives, the bad things that happened, the bad parts of it, unless they were extremely traumatic. We tend to gloss over these things. And this is what a lot of people who are no longer in the Soviet system or escaped from the Soviet system, some of them remember this. A lot of people who grew up in that, my wife grew up in the Soviet system. A lot of contemporaries, a lot of people I knew grew up in the Soviet system, expats who got away from it. And you listen to the true face of Soviet style communism and you hear the true stories. I won't go into that. If you really want to research it, research what Soviet expats from the Soviet Union, Latvians, Lithuanians, like I says, all the different peoples that were embraced or forced to embrace communism. The the dissolution of their culture, the enforced Russification programs. I could go on and on. The dangers of the Cold War, of the militarism. The Cold War, especially under Stalin, was a terrifying time to be around. There was a minister named Grechko. I mentioned this in a previous post. The chief of the Soviet General Staff, Grechko, was willing to accept 90% Soviet casualties if he could destroy the United States, because that was the backbone of NATO. They figured the rest of Europe they could take. I went on that in a previous post. You can look at that. I won't go there again. But what I found terrifying about this, and the Soviet mindset, Stalin's mindset, was he had to destroy the Western democracies because as long as they existed, the people had hope. They dreamed America was the promised land, Canada secondary, but Australia, South America, they dreamed about getting away from the repression of the Soviet regime. They had hope that maybe somehow, someday, they could get away from communism. Stalin knew that the only way he could enforce, in spite of all the brutal measures he took to enforce compliance, the secret police, the denunciations, the purges, the shipments to the gulags, in spite of all of that, people still had hope. So he had to destroy that hope. He had to destroy the Western democracies so he could destroy the hope. And then the people would be so beaten down they would have no other option but to follow the dictates of the state. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that is horrifyingly, brutally cynicism. I can't believe, but that mindset, that was the mindset. So people go marching and, well, we embrace communism and the socialist lifestyle. Morons, idiots, willful idiots, cognitive dissonance, that you will ignore historical and current factual reality to embrace something that does not work, has been proven not to work, and indeed is probably one of the most horrifyingly, shockingly evil regimes that ever existed. And you embrace this? You're idiots. You are moronic, half witted, brainwashed fools. So, that's my dissertation for the morning. Have a good day, my fellow Canadians.